All right, welcome back, guys. New intro, new lecture. Let's talk about light-dark reinforcement. That is how the use of light and dark tones in an image can reinforce and change that image. So here I have a tatami, a double square, and inside this double square format, I have two smaller squares of equal size. They're placed equidistant from top and bottom and to their closest left and right edges. So everything else being equal, in this instance, we have essentially two elements, these squares, that have very similar weight. There might be more weight in the right square because items on the right are weighted more heavily in terms of perceptual force, because we tend to read things from left to right. And so our eyes tend to linger on the right side a little longer. So what happens if we change this by adding a little light and dark? What if we make the left square dark? Immediately, the weight distribution in the design is shifted, it changes. Now the square on the left is heavier than the square on the right. So the addition of this tone, of this black expansive color filling in that square, has changed the weight, has changed the way that we perceive this image. Okay, what if we switch sides here? Now the square on the right is heavier than the one on the left, and it is made extra heavy by the fact that it is, again, on the right side, and items on the right tend to feel heavier than those on the left. What if we change this once again? What if we have a black background and white squares? Well, now again, our distribution of weight from left to right square has been more or less made equal, but there is overall a different experience of the design here. Okay, let's change this again and make one lighter than the other. And now we see that before where we demonstrated that making an element darker could add weight to it, now in this dark field, making an element lighter can make it appear to be heavier. And if we switch sides, we'll see the same thing happen again. But let's complicate this exercise a little further. Now we have a white square within a white square on the left, and a black square within a black square on the right. And we can see that the weight distribution here tends to fall more heavily again on the right because of the darker tonality. It's heavier to our perception. Okay, now what if we switch the position of these squares? Okay, we can sense a sort of equilibrium start to return to the image. This might look very similar to you to a yin-yang symbol, right? So that there is dark within the light and light within the dark. Okay. There's something else that happens here. When the black square is placed within a white field, to my eye, it seems as if the black square has a tendency to grow a little bit. Whereas on the right side, with the white square and the black field, the white square perceptually has a tendency to shrink a little bit. This is the perceptual force of these light and dark tones on our image. And although we might say that the black square feels as if it might be growing a little bit and the white square might feel as if it is shrinking a little bit, there is more or less an equilibrium in terms of the weight of the design. You should also know that perceptually, light areas advance and dark areas recede, so that now we've created space within our two-dimensional design through the simple application of tonality. And again, let's see what happens when we mirror this image. There is a sense of equilibrium, but the pressure is different than before. Obviously so, because we're looking at a mirrored image. These are the sorts of things that you can do to change an otherwise symmetrical design to make it more visually appealing, to produce a more complex relationship between the elements. Now I'm going to do something here, and I'm going to take this a little bit of a step further, and we're going to start talking about relational tonality, which is something that we'll actually get more into in design too when you start to look at color relationships. But I'm going to reduce the black to a very dark gray, and I'm going to darken the white to be a very light gray. And once we make that shift, the image as a whole starts to unify a little bit. The contrast between the tonalities is lessened, which allows a greater unity across the image. This is an important step towards understanding how color is going to work for you next semester. You'll also notice that by pushing our two tones, white and black, just ever so slightly closer together, now the relationship of the dark square and the light field is more responsive, is more immediate. And the same can be said for the light square and the dark field. That by reducing the contrast between the tones, that you've actually given the design the ability to contrast more meaningfully, which is a bit of a paradox, but that's how tone works. And I'm going to take this even a step further here. In this design, the gray square on the right appears to be darker than the gray square on the left. But I'm going to show you here that they're actually the same tone. This is a demonstration of the idea of 3 tones as 4. By placing a middle gray in a dark field, the dark field will make that gray appear lighter than it actually is. And by placing that same middle gray in a light field, the light surrounding that gray will make that middle gray appear darker than it actually is. So here you've taken 3 tonalities, a very close to black charcoal gray, a very close to white gray, and a middle gray, and made them appear as 4 different tones. That's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Right now, you guys are just going to be dealing in white and black. But I wanted to kind of introduce this idea to you right now. So we've seen this image before. This was a demonstration of balance, right? And how we can have 2 large elements on the right balanced by a single smaller element on the left through the principle of isolation. Isolation makes our circle on the left appear to be as heavy as the 2 objects, the rectangle and the triangle, who are grouped together as a unit on the right. So the proximity of the 2 elements on the right make them appear as a single unit that has a great weight to it. Add to that the fact that it is in the right side, right? So it has an added weight in those terms. And you would think that it would be difficult to make the circle balance that weight out across our format. But by isolating the circle, by putting it by itself, it draws attention to the circle, right? So it makes it appear perceptually heavier than it would otherwise. So again, this isolation principle balancing our design out here. Now I'm going to throw tone into this, and immediately the image loses that balance. Now the circle on the left is far too heavy to balance out our 2 elements on the right. If I switch this though, and I place the tone in the 2 shapes on the right side, this design still has the potential for balance. I find that the isolation of the circle on the left is so strong and adds so much weight that it is still able to hold its own against the two shapes on the right side here. So again, that demonstration of how the addition of tone can alter the weight and the balance of a design. Here's a line drawing. We might find some shapes in here. We have 3 oval shapes, a few rectangular shapes, and there's some organic shapes in there as well. This is a line drawing of a painting by Robert Motherwell. And you can see here, when we look at the actual painting, how the addition of tonality entirely alters our relationship with the design itself. Now, there's interesting interplay between the dark areas and the light areas, the way that the white negative space seems to hold onto the dark positive shapes, right? Or does that begin to switch somewhere? Do the positive and negative spaces, this figure-ground relationship, start to switch in some places here because of the addition of tonality to this painting? Let's look at another example of that. So here's tracing of a design by Aubrey Beardsley, and it has some interesting elements to it. It is very strong in and of itself, a design, but that's going to radically change when we add tone to it. Now this contrast is made even more apparent. The extra weight that is added on the right side by our human form here, Madame Regine, the way that she takes up the entire right side of the design. In addition to that, the psychological weight of the human face doesn't really hold so much when we look at just the tracing of it. But adding all that heavy black tonality to the left side helps to balance this composition out a little. So a reinforcement of what was already there through the use of tone, through the use of a contrast between light and dark. Here's a tracing of a print by Emil Nolde. This image as a tracing actually doesn't make a lot of sense at all. But here, when we add back this dark tonality, then the image becomes immediately clear. So this is a print called The Prophet. And you can see the drastic change between the tracing and the use of tone and the way that that alters the image there. This one's going to be a bit more complex because there's use of more than just 2 tones, more than just white and black here to consider. But here's a tracing of a painting by Mary Cassatt, and I'm going to add tone to it. And immediately our relationship, the balance of space in this image is changed. So as I said, light areas tend to advance and dark areas tend to recede. Here, Mary Cassatt is playing with the use of perception through her placement of light and dark areas, so that the dark body of the guy rowing the boat lays on top of, in front of, the light baby and woman sitting there on the boat and the light boat itself. If light has the propensity to advance towards us perceptually, then by placing a dark figure on top of that, it prevents the light object from advancing too far into our perceptual field. So she's playing with this push and pull, this plastic isomorphic tendency of the picture plane, right? This is the kind of tension, this balance in depth space between what is advancing and what is going back in space, and also how to maintain the integrity of the picture plane itself. You'll also notice the way that the woman's hat that she's wearing, there's a dark flower on the front of it, which perfectly aligns with the coast that you see in the far background. this lends a kind of flattening effect. It brings the coast up to us perceptually in the same plane as the hat that she's wearing. And now I'm going to add the color to the image, and you can see this even more so. These effects are being played on by the placement of light and dark. But now we have color to deal with as well, so that the child wearing pink, this warm color, this red color, right? Red, warm colors tend to advance, while cool colors, this dark blue of the rower's jacket, tends to recede, so that the child's dress that they're wearing doesn't advance too far towards us. And in fact, you'll see that flower that she was wearing on her hat back there, that it is actually the same color, this green color, as the coastline in the background as well. So again, a kind of flattening out of the space while giving us space at the same time. And we'll just look at one more of these. So here's a tracing of a Matisse print, and we'll see what happens when we add light and dark contrast to it. Now, Matisse is playing with a figure-ground relationship here pretty seriously. This is an image of Icarus. If you're familiar with the myth, Icarus flew too high in the sky, got too close to the sun melted the wings that his father had made for him, held together with wax, and he falls in the sky. So here's an image of Icarus falling. This is very much a story of the universe pushing back against Icarus's hubris here. So the universe is affecting, is enveloping, is pushing into and against this figural form of Icarus falling through the sky. And so you have convex shapes pushing into the concave form under Icarus's shoulder and into his torso there. So the figure-ground relationship, although it is very stark because it's two tones meeting each other, there's no way for the light of the ground to enter into the figure, because the figure is so malleable and so full of convex and concave shapes, then that relationship between figure-ground is softened. There's also a second thing which Matisse is doing, which he has this little dot on the inside of Icarus's body. This is called internal contrast. And the internal contrast in that figural shape is stronger than the contrast between the figure and the ground surrounding it. So what that does, this internal contrast, this very strong contrast placed on the inside of the figure, softens the relationship between the figure and ground on the outer edge of the figure. And here's the image in color, and you can see that this internal contrast is even stronger because of that sharp red against the black. The only instance of red in the image, very small amounts. The smallness of the expanse of red actually heightens the effect of the red because it's in isolation again, right? Isolation makes things appear heavier. So the isolation of the red, that it is the only instance of red, actually calls attention to itself, makes a very strong contrast against that black field of the figure, which softens the relationship between figure and ground, which again, this is what this myth is about. It is the universe pushing back against Icarus's hubris here. So visually, this is being communicated by the contrast between the light and dark, the way that Matisse is using convex and concave shapes on the figure and allowing the field or the negative space to push into the positive form. And that's it for today. I wanted to make this one shorter. We've had some pretty long lectures, but we've had some important things that I had to get through for you guys. So let's take a look at homework. Only one tonight. Studio problem number 23. Using narrow dark lines in a root 2 format, that's the 5x7 format, Create a unity of position with a contrast of shape, and reinforce with light and dark tones. So you're using white and black. That's it. Let's not get into middle grays or any other sorts of grays right now. Just use stark white and black contrast to heighten and reinforce your designs. And you'll find that when you start to add the dark tonality to your designs, that it's going to alter things. It's going to make things appear heavier in some places, right? And lighter in others. So it's up to you then, once you start to add this light-dark contrast, to find a way to find balance once again within that design. It might mean moving some elements around once you add in that dark tonality. So play with it, see what happens. If you have any questions, send me an email.